would be by Mr. Hilal. Giving a brief introduction, Mr. Hilal leads the Information Security Department at 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗏, striving to revolutionize payment solutions for businesses. Possessing an extensive understanding of threat landscape, risk management and compliance, Hilal has demonstrated a consistent ability to implement and maintain effective security strategies. With over 16 plus years of experience, he brings a robust technical background and expertise in network security, application security and data privacy, positioning him to guide 𝗕𝗂𝗏 to continued success in the ever-changing threat environment. With this, let's welcome him with a big round of applause.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Ranganathan. So it was very insightful, your talk. We are a digital native company, so we tend to not hear what you're just talking about, right? So we have bits and pieces that we actually care about. Thank you so much for that insights. Well, I was hoping to spend some time on my introduction, but that has already been done. So let's get started on multi-cloud strategy. So I believe that everybody in this particular room has heard of multi-cloud strategy, what it is and why it is needed. And but what is most important is to basically understand what challenges and what opportunities come with it. So about me, of course, you just heard my introduction, so no need to do that. So when we started the multi-cloud strategy, so there are amazing basically facts that are coming out of the industry. So some of the things that, for example, 93% of the organizations are actually adopting a multi-cloud strategy, which is astonishing, which means that it's close to all the businesses, all the organizations, all the companies actually are going to be multi-cloud in some point of time, right? I think they have already been there. So, and Gartner actually reported that companies are actually going to be spending 80% of their budget on basically multi-cloud strategy, which again, surprisingly, so it actually surprised me because if you look at basically the budgeting that's actually required for IT and IT assets, right? So you tend to basically ignore the fact that, okay, there's so much money being actually channeled into cloud solutions. And the dependency on basically cloud is going to be massive. And the fact that 80% of the budget, which is almost the entire budget, is going to be on basically multi-cloud strategy. So in terms of basically the diversification of basically clouds in an organization, so another basically surprising fact, I think most people will agree with this particular fact that on an average, every company will have around 2.6 service providers, right? So our company does that. We have more than one cloud service provider, and I'm sure that other organizations, other companies will actually have more than that, if not less than that. So, so in terms of basically what are the opportunities, what the benefits basically people have basically in terms of the statistics and the data that we have found, IBM actually reported that there was a consistent 30% drop in actually the pricing for the when you adopt multi-cloud strategy. It means basically you clearly have an advantage in terms of price cost optimization when you actually go for a multi-cloud strategy. So, and IDC also did a research, and they actually found that, okay, resilience and reliance on basically data centers, the 72% of the organizations said, okay, they are going to be more reliant, and they experience less downtime as compared to basically singular or basically unipolar cloud. Moving on, so what are actually the drivers? We saw in the data also, the statistics actually said, they were basically self-explanatory, but one of the most important actually aspect of multi-cloud strategy adoption is basically improving and enhancing basically resilience. What that means? It means that people really don't want to be basically dependent on a single cloud for their uptime, for providing services and hosting their data. So they want to basically go to multiple clouds to make sure that they have enough resiliency in case of a disaster or in case they need to maintain some kind of business continuity. So the second thing that actually the second driver for this particular thing is basically they want to avoid vendor lock-in. What does that mean? On one hand, vendor lock-in is basically nothing but, okay, you get to basically adopt so many services from a particular service provider that you have no way to get out of that particular service provider. So what it does is basically you are going to be like massively dependent on a service provider. And tomorrow, if the policies or terms and conditions or legislation or regulations actually tomorrow change, you have absolutely no way of coming out of that agreement. So that's why I think that one of the most important drivers is to basically make sure that they are not vendor locked in. So other basically like driver for this multi-cloud strategy adoption is basically optimize cost and resources. Cost, we already saw that 30% of the organization, organizations actually achieved 30% of cost reduction by adopting multi-cloud strategy. But it's at the same time, what they do want to do is basically, they want to basically make sure that the resources that they have are not focused on a particular technology or a particular technical stack. So what they want to do is they want to make sure whatever resources they have, they are used to the most optimum way. And they want to basically make sure that they are basically diversified and want to make sure that they are used to the best potential that they can. So, and one of the most, I think in my opinion, this is one of the most important aspects of multi-cloud strategy, which is basically risk mitigation. How does multi-cloud actually like achieve risk mitigation? Is all about basically making sure that you have a resilience availability of your services so that your customers who depend on your services actually are not basically denied those services if you are actually logged in with a particular vendor, right? So this is actually extremely important. So what are the different challenges? So multi-cloud, if you have more than one service provider, so you will always have like basically a myriad of services that are going to be running in terms of computer services, data services, APIs, things like that. So managing that particular complexity is going to be really, really difficult. I'm sure that everybody in this particular room has experienced that. People from basically data centers, people from whenever. It's actually not so different from the physical data centers, because when you actually like increase the complexity, you need more basically specialized skills to manage them. You need specialized tools to basically monitor them. You also need to basically make sure that you have enough tools to basically understand the layout of your architecture, layout of your data sources, and layout of your compute sources. So complexity is going to be always going to be challenging in a multi-cloud environment. The second, which is actually very, very important, is basically governance and compliance. So governance and compliance, when you have a single cloud, you actually have a better visibility in terms of basically having basically top-down or maybe like enforced policies, enforced basically tools, and enforced basically identity solutions, basically like all the tools that you need to make sure that you have some consistency in your compliance posture. But in a multi-cloud strategy, what happens is that if you have more than one cloud service provider, what it does is basically like it does not allow you to basically have that flexibility. So you need to basically create your policies and have the consistency in tools to make sure that it actually is not a concern. What that means is that you need to have basically like a policy that actually spans across the cloud service providers. So if you're a multi-cloud basically establishment, you need to have that in place. Consistency tools, I think that's very important, right? So why that's a challenge? For example, you have anything like APM or monitoring solutions or anything like, say, security solutions, right? So sometimes what happens is they don't span across different clouds, and that's actually a big challenge. I'll tell you a very simple example, right? So even today, right? So if you, for example, want to have a centralized incident management system, does it actually span across the different basically clouds? Very, very difficult to achieve, right? So, and in fact, like because of the, the differences in the way they actually like ship logs or basically they ship different events, it's going to be difficult to basically parse them and basically have a uniformity in them to basically achieve some kind of intelligence. So that's why the tool consistency is not going to be there, and we are still actually like far away from having that harmonized basically incident management system in multi-cloud strategy. So, so cloud security architecture. So why should it evolve with technology? It should, obviously, that's like a common sense thing, right? So it should evolve with technology means that whatever and however the advancement in technology happens, the security strategy needs to basically evolve with it as well. So if, for example, there is a service that's actually going to replace a like service, so you need to ensure that you do your own basically security architecture assessment, do threat modeling, do security assessments, and make sure that actually like your security architecture is as current as possible. So it's not going to be basically easy, because like when you have multi-cloud strategy, you need to have an architecture that's actually consistent. And because of the vulnerabilities that evolve with the technology, it's not always going to be possible. So of course, like the second is self-explanatory. You should periodically reassess your cloud security strategy. What that means is, from basically all the different preventive, detective, or even compensatory controls, whatever you have in place, you need to ensure that they are actually current and actually working across multiple clouds. So, and of course, like be always basically current and focused for in case of like emerging threats and technologies. How this can be achieved is basically like how we have done it is basically like we have a robust way of actually collecting threat intelligence, implementing monitoring systems, and making sure that our systems and everything is actually hardened and passed. And that way, actually, like all of those systems actually are resistant towards any kind of threats and vulnerabilities. So, in terms of basically like boundaries of security responsibilities, I think this has been debated a lot. Like, who is basically going to be responsible for security in a multi-cloud? So, even a single cloud, I'm sure like security practitioners in this room, so always have a bit of confusion in terms of, in case of an attack, who is going to be responsible. If you are basically adopting cloud as a software as a service, right, so you have a different security responsibility. You have platform as a service, you have a different basically responsibility model. And if you have infrastructure as a service, you have a different security model. So, so the responsibility of the security actually like changes significantly depending on the model that you have adopted. So in case of, for example, infrastructure as security, you have basically like a shared responsibility model where you need to be actually like working with your service providers to make sure that you have control over your security requirements. Also, like there are like a couple of things that are actually going to be really important to understand when you're actually drafting your terms and conditions for your multi-cloud strategy. So you may not be able to achieve consistency, but where you can have consistency is basically the way you actually use those services. So and you need to understand and make sure that you are familiar with like what are the different challenges that you are going to have in case you are responsible for the security, and you devise your strategy according to that. So strategy for cloud security monitoring. So of course, like this is going to be extremely crucial. That across multiple clouds, like I was just talking about basically like log shipping and things like that, or basically event analysis and things like that. It's always going to be difficult, basically like when you actually have hybrid clouds or multiple deployments. So public cloud deployments actually are not always going to be like basically like managed by the same security monitoring solution that you may have. I mean, I have basically like two different sets of basically monitoring solutions for different basic service providers. And that obviously is not a very ideal situation, because I need to be able to specialize in those particular services and make sure that, okay, we maintain and monitor them. So continuous monitoring and anomaly detection is actually going to be very important. So it's always going to be difficult to achieve in a multi-cloud strategy. It's actually difficult to achieve in singular cloud strategy, but it's equally important, basically it's equally harder to basically achieve this in a multi-cloud strategy. So, but this is extremely crucial. So if you want to be secure and you want to be safe and you don't want to be breached, this is what you are going to do. You are going to have continuous monitoring on your systems and assets in your cloud. And incident response plan, no doubt about it, this is going to be basically important, because you need to make sure that you have the capacity and basically like you know what your basically return time objectives are, what your MTTRs are, what your MTTDs are. So you need to make sure that, I'm sorry, so I should actually explain them. Mean time to detect is basically like how long does it take for people to detect the incident, and mean time to repair is how remediate or repair is how long does it take for you to basically like mitigate that particular incident. And RTOs, which is return time objective, right? Return time objective is basically like at what point in the past do you want to basically come back from an incident? So how much data loss can you actually be okay with, or what is your risk threshold where you want to be? So so yeah, so of course like monitoring, cloud security monitoring is going to be extremely efficient. So endpoint security. So I think this is again a no-brainer, right? So but in multi-cloud strategy, what happens is that like endpoints are not always going to be similar. So what works in basically like the likes of Amazon or Google are not going to be working on basically Microsoft and other clouds. So I'm surprised. I'm somehow like I feel like Microsoft does a better job of endpoint security, which is surprising for me. But at the same time, the fact that we need basically endpoint security, basically not only on the enterprise side, but on the cloud side as well. So this is basically going to be one of the crucial blocks or the fundamental blocks for your defense in depth strategy. So if you want to make sure that your data does not get breached or assets do not get hacked, you need to make sure that your endpoints are basically hardened and secure, and there's enough monitoring, enough detection in place to make sure that they are not compromised. So in conclusion, so multi-cloud strategy is here to be, like it's going to be mainstream. So I don't feel like it's going to go away at all. And in fact, like it's going to get even busier as the time comes, right? So, and of course, like endpoint security always going to remain critical. It's going to remain crucial. And you need to ensure that you have continuous robust monitoring and make sure that you actually review and adopt all the changes that are happening in public cloud and multi-cloud strategy. With this, I actually conclude. So if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Yes, please. Sure. Let me sort of repeat that what you just said.
Yeah.
You're asking about how do we reduce inefficiencies between multi-clouds, right? So
yeah, especially when modules have to interact with each other.
Absolutely. So, so what happens is like there's always going to be a challenge in actually achieving efficiency when you have multi-cloud strategy, right? So, for example, like if you wanted to have a SaaS service provider and you actually create private links or something like that, it used to basically bring some level of efficiency when you have like a single cloud or on a particular cloud. But what happens that when you don't have that kind of luxury, right? So you always are going to be basically like loaded with additional cost. Basically, like your resource basically consumption is going to increase, and not only that, but even your policy and the basically the governance cost is going to really increase as well. So think about it, right? So for example, you are doing an audit on your basically access control systems on your clouds, right? So not only is like basically you have to basically have multiple different audit specialists, but also you have to basically different audit frequencies because they don't work on the same clock. So at the same time, what happens that because of the cost optimization that you might actually achieve is always going to be subjected to basically how fast and how efficiently those clouds actually work together. Normally, like this is achieved by actually like at least what I perceive is that you have multiple clouds, and one of the clouds is going to be your primary, basically like primary service provider, and the other one is going to be your secondary service provider, which is going to be your disaster recovery or business continuity kind of solution, right? So in that context, like so you will always have inefficiency. Is granted, right? So, but what you could potentially do is there are enough tools available to make sure that you actually suffer less than what you expect. So it's not going to go away. That's what I feel.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
This is to add a little, or probably take on your advice around the monitoring that you figured it out. Looks like you have multi-cloud and reasonably well-maintained monitoring. Did you figure out if there are long-running jobs like simulations and so on, which takes long, and if you're spreading between multi-cloud, did you figure out the monitoring across cloud without failing these jobs and shifting between the clouds?
There are two aspects, right? So I'm so sorry. One is basically your I don't know. So one is basically like your APM things that you actually do, right? So you will have your APM basically for observations, for observability and availability. You will have a solution that actually monitors across the clouds, and we have enough homogenized solutions that can actually take care of that. But the second one is basically how do you sort of bring commonality, and how do you make sure that whatever basically like definitions you have in one cloud actually match with the other cloud. Okay. So what is meant by that is, for example, you have a return time objective of, say, for example, 5 hours basically for your one cloud, right? Does it actually translate the same across the other clouds? So that's not always going to be possible. So the other side of it, the other basically side of it is that when you have basically multiple layers to basically protect or multiple layers to basically monitor. So even then, all of these things are going to be crucial in terms of basically identifying them. And it always has a challenge in terms of basically like achieving some kind of benchmarking or some kind of universal plugins that can actually do that job for you. And that's hardly ever available. For example, like we deploy a tool and it actually says, oh, I have a universal plugin that can actually like fetch logs from all your service providers. And then you have a common tool that actually builds on top of that and basically make sure that, okay, you have some sense of basically uniform basically monitoring across your clouds. It is actually achievable, and it has been, I mean, it's fairly common practice now to make sure that you have a cloud agnostic solution like cloud posted management solutions or other solutions that you can potentially use to basically monitor across your clouds. In security context, that's the CSPM tools and other tools, basically Synapse tools, other things that we use, actually bring that uniformity. But it's not going to be applicable on the when you are actually using those tools for basically like monitoring your availability, performance, and basically response of your system.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll connect with you during the break to learn a little more.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, sir.